In August of 1869, self-taught American geologist John Wesley Powell led a scientific expedition in the state of Wyoming. He never expected that in the process, his team would discover the Great Unconformity, a huge chronological gap in our planet's geological record. Looking up one of the cliffs, Powell saw that its solid crystalline rocks were arranged not in usual horizontal layers, but almost vertically, as if someone had taken away a piece of earth and piled up the remaining parts as if nothing had happened. Further explorations showed that the lowest strata were up to 425 million years old, while the rock just above them turned out to be almost 80 million years younger. And that's it. There was nothing in between. Modern scientists keep arguing about the origin of this phenomenon, but most of them tend to think that it appeared during the Marinoan glaciation. During this period, a thick ice crust formed on Earth's surface, and then new rocks layered right over it. But when the glaciers receded, they sent a big chunk of geological history into oblivion. This is not an isolated case. Quite often, temporal inconsistencies cannot even be explained. If the problem is limited to Wyoming cliffs, it may not seem very important. But it's hard to stay indifferent when the coherence of all human history is suddenly at risk. In this video, you'll find out, where did 3 centuries of the Middle Ages disappear to? How did the Vatican manage to fabricate chapters of our history for over 1,000 years? Could there have been an ancient nuclear war we've never been told about? And what chronological contradictions cast doubt on the accepted history of humankind? Scientists still can't agree on the exact timeline of the Middle Ages. Some researchers aren't even sure that almost half of this historical period was real. In 1991, German historian Herbert Illig uncovered an ancient conspiracy able to change the entirety of human history. At the very end of the 10th century AD, the Holy Roman Emperor Otto III decided to regain control of Italy. Several decades before that, those territories had been conquered by the Lombards, an old Germanic people. French-born Bishop Gerbert of Aurillac offered Otto III his help. As a result, the emperor achieved the desired outcome and thanked his ally for the support by letting him get elected as the new pope, Sylvester II. So what was that special favor that the emperor felt the need to return? When the territories were recaptured, Otto III claimed he was closely connected to the Carolingian dynasty that ruled over extensive parts of Europe between the 7th and 9th centuries AD. It's now believed that this royal family, and especially one of its members, Charlemagne, or Charles the Great, strongly influenced the course of medieval events. Charlemagne was the exact person to unite a lot of disparate tribes into a single state, which became known as the Frankish Empire. Otto III insisted that he only wanted to restore historical justice, although Herbert Illig says that the emperor totally invented the Carolingians by adding 300 extra years into history. And Pope Sylvester II encouraged the idea. At first, this seemingly insane theory was dismissed by the scientific community. But a bit later, there appeared strong proof to back it up. Archaeologists have long noticed a surprising lack of findings that would date back to the time span between the 7th and 10th centuries AD. We've already found hundreds of artifacts created before and after it. However, very few objects were made in the Carolingian era, and experts are still unsure if they correctly determined their age. Moreover, historians are yet to give a clear explanation of why we can see so many remarkably old buildings in Western Europe. This is San Sisto, a church in the Italian city of Pisa. It's believed to have been erected in the early 11th century. Despite this, its facade looks more like pre-Romanesque constructions. In other words, the buildings that had appeared in Europe 300 years earlier. Usually, architectural styles develop and replace each other relatively quickly. For example, early Gothic buildings can hardly be compared with the so-called flamboyant phase of late Gothic architecture. Mind that this dramatic change happened within one single century. Then why does it seem that at the dawn of the Middle Ages, architecture stopped developing at all? Unfortunately, even reliable historical evidence can't help us unlock this mystery. In 1986, participants of an archaeological conference held in Munich, Germany, figured out that over half of the medieval documents were forgeries. Specifically, Decretalis Isidoriani, or Pseudo-Isidore, a set of works that glorified Roman bishops. It was allegedly written in the 6th century. However, scientific examination showed the presence of pigments that couldn't possibly be used before the 9th century AD. Is it really true that everything we've been taught about the Middle Ages was a lie? But don't be too quick to throw all your history books out of the window, since all the proof of Herbert Illig's theory is indirect at best. Instead of being forged, the papers could be just rewritten much later. After all, the same thing often happened to medieval manuscripts. As for archaeological findings dating back to the Carolingian era, perhaps their time will come in the future. Besides, the concept of the Phantom Middle Ages in Europe doesn't correlate well with the history of the rest of the world. From the 7th to the 10th centuries AD, China flourished under the Tang dynasty, which deeply cared about the country's cultural and economic development. Moreover, that was when China significantly expanded its borders, so there's no way we can just erase this period from history. But even though Herbert Illig's theory wasn't flawless, he managed to draw the experts' attention to several other inconsistencies and make them doubt the authenticity of many artifacts and documents. And some of them had much more critical importance than 300 years. The Vatican has been notoriously known for trying to manipulate facts, but there's one case that was apparently influencing the fate of the whole European continent for 1,500 years. In the early 4th century, the Eastern Roman Empire reached an unprecedented prosperity. Emperor Constantine the Great was the first ruler to make Christianity the dominant state religion. But pursuing such a righteous goal didn't save the emperor from developing leprosy. Doctors were powerless, and the future of dozens of hundreds of Christians was hanging in the balance. However, a miracle happened, and all thanks to Pope Sylvester I. Rumor had it that his prayers healed Emperor Constantine when he already had one foot in the grave. So if you think that healthcare costs are too high in your country, you should know that Constantine was so grateful to Sylvester I that he surrendered his power and vast territories to the Pope. However, Sylvester wasn't prepared to take this kind of responsibility and gave that power back. That was the story told in the mid-8th century by Pope Stephen II to Pepin the Short, king of the Franks. The pontiff even confirmed his words with the corresponding document, the Donation of Constantine. With its help, Stephen II wanted to snatch away territories that Pepin the Short had conquered shortly before. The Pope claimed that since Sylvester I hadn't officially documented his refusal to accept the gift, all the lands mentioned in the decree still rightfully belonged to the Church. Pepin the Short couldn't argue much because he didn't know how to read, so he couldn't understand what the document said. Consequently, he had no choice but to obey Stephen II. If he could have scanned that text, he'd probably be amazed by some of the lines like those giving the Pope a right to make the king act as his groom. These shamelessly creative points were there for one simple reason. The document was a forgery. Though it didn't stop the Church from using the fake decree for many following centuries, occasionally appropriating pieces of land. Gradually, the Vatican took control of a considerable part of central Italy, including Rome and its outskirts, plus some regions such as Emilia-Romagna, Umbria, Lazio, and Marche. In the late 16th century, when Cardinal Causar Baronois realized how contradictory the donation of Constantine was and dared to talk about it, he was quickly silenced. It may sound crazy, but only in 1929, and only under enormous public pressure, the Church finally admitted using a forged paper for 15 centuries to customize the map of Europe to its liking. Anyway, the Vatican had to return all the stolen territories, and now it occupies less than half a square kilometer. But what if the donation of Constantine is just the tip of the iceberg? Vatican City still has the secret apostolic archive that remains almost inaccessible. You won't be allowed to enter it even if you're a journalist working for one of the world's top media companies or a student writing a thesis on the history of the Catholic Church. The only outsiders who can try their luck are scientists aged 75 years. Furthermore, each of the scholars can take only 3 requested articles, and if they need to read more texts, the complex procedure of getting an entry card must be repeated once again. The secret archive may hide documentary evidence of what really happened in the Middle Ages between the 7th and the 10th centuries. But what if this well-protected secret isn't just the history of a certain era, but a full-blown nuclear war? Could one of the ancient civilizations have possessed weapons that were anything but our modern ideas and expectations of them? In 1829, when traveling through present-day Pakistan, Charles Masson discovered the remains of an ancient city named Harappa. Excavation showed the first settlements there appeared in the 4th millennium BC. And yet, there was one thing that surprised researchers even more than the age of the ruins. All the streets of Harappa were built following the same principle, from north to south, from east to west. It was done not only for aesthetics, it gave the citizens access to running water. Thousands of years before our time, residents of Harappa had something more impressive than toilets. They had their own swimming pools. And not only that, researchers determined that the city's main square used to have a public bathhouse whose floors and outside walls were covered with resin to make them leak-proof. Remember that we're talking about an era before the Egyptian pyramids. In other words, back when other people couldn't build anything more durable than huts made of mud and straw. All these things that confounded the expectations of archaeologists were the achievements of the Indus Valley civilization, one of the most mysterious and least studied in human history. But why do we know so little about the humans who were so ahead of their time? Could the members of this ancient civilization have had knowledge that some of our contemporaries are still trying to hide from us? In 1300 BC, the Indus civilization suddenly ceased to exist. Scientists have long puzzled over what could have caused the demise of such an advanced society. Some of them thought it was a natural disaster, and others assumed that those resourceful people just ran out of valuable resources. And then, in 1977, researcher David Davenport discovered something that disproved all these assumptions. Working at an excavation site, he noticed a pit 50 meters in diameter. All the rocks inside of it were kind of melted and transformed into a glass-like substance. A thing like that could only happen at very high temperatures of no less than 1500 degrees Celsius. This looked very much like the consequences of an explosion as powerful as an atomic blast. What's even more stunning, further studies only proved this seemingly wild hypothesis when archaeologists found a layer of radioactive cinder near the excavation site. On top of that, when experts measured the radiation background of some of the remnants, it turned out to be 50 times above normal. Does this mean that several thousand years ago, warring civilizations were actively using nuclear bombs against each other? In the Mahabharata, ancient Indian epic poetry, you can come across descriptions of a massive explosion with the brightness of 10,000 suns that could turn whole populations to ashes. It also mentions the consequences of such detonations in great detail. The survivors lost their hair and teeth, and the soil and food were contaminated. But what if this isn't just a scary tale about the gods' weapons, but a brief historical report of actual events? And if an ancient civilization knew how to create atomic bombs, what other skills could it have had? Quite a lot of Indian ceramic tablets with mysterious inscriptions have survived to the present day. By the look of things, these ancient humans were pretty educated. Some experts believe that the tablets contain descriptions of all the main inventions created by the Indus civilization. And the only problem here is that we still haven't found a way to decipher these writings. The only conclusion scientists have drawn so far is that the language of those people was written from right to left. That's not much information, is it? But could there be someone who actually managed to read the tablets and decided not to tell anyone because the truth was too shocking and contradicted all of our knowledge about the past of humankind? Who knows? Perhaps those artifacts mention something else besides nuclear weapons, like, for example, a lost continent only a few modern people have heard about. Could we have completely overlooked the existence of a full-fledged continent? Back in 1642, Dutch sailor Abel Tasman went on a dangerous journey whose purpose sounded quite absurd at that time, to find the seventh continent. Tasman was driven by a very simple idea. The southern hemisphere was bound to have some colossal landmass to counterbalance the greatness of Eurasia, located in the northern part of the globe. The sailor thought the recently discovered Australia was way too small and unsuitable for such an important role. During his expedition, he, among other things, often checked the map made by sailor Puri Reis in 1513. The map depicted a giant continent similar to Antarctica. Meanwhile, in reality, Europeans found it much later, in 1820. Reis said he'd copied the image from an ancient document saved from the already destroyed Library of Alexandria. The map had yet another peculiarity. According to it, there was a small isthmus connecting the unknown continent in South America. Some contemporary scholars think that protruding piece of land could be just a part of the continent, so cartographers just made a mistake when mapping it. But since the accuracy of maps was crucial and determined the fates of many sailors, why didn't people get rid of that dangerous drawing, but instead chose to keep it? Anyway, Abel Tasman never found the lost continent. The sailor only discovered a few islands in the Pacific Ocean, but didn't even dare land on them because of the hostile local tribes. Nowadays, we call those islands New Zealand, and that was anything but a new continent. However, in 2017, an international group of geologists went on an expedition to the coast of New Caledonia. They wanted to study the features of the ocean floor in the region, but stumbled upon an unexpected fact. The seabed samples contained pollen from land plants and the remains of primitive organisms unable to survive in deep waters. Furthermore, the samples turned out to have a lot of slate, sedimentary rock that simply doesn't belong on the ocean floor. All signs were that this territory used to be dry land some time ago. Was it really the lost continent, though? Geologists compared their findings with the detailed analysis of satellite data and came to a sensational conclusion. Around 25 million years ago, there indeed was an additional continent on Earth called Zealandia. Abel Tasman would surely be amazed to find out he was right. The outlines of the ancient continent can still be seen under the 2-kilometer thick water mass. But why aren't scientists rushing to tell the world about Zealandia? Well, because even their bright minds can't understand how a whole continent became submerged. They're afraid to jump to conclusions that threaten to totally change all of human history. Maybe the answer lies in another geological phenomenon found on the other side of the planet, the so-called Eye of the Sahara. It was discovered by American astronauts in 1965. This almost symmetrical structure is made of many concentric circles of exposed sedimentary rock. Experts keep arguing about possible causes of this anomaly, but one thing is certain. Around 12,000 years ago, this part of the mainland was underwater, because when studying the surface of the exposed rock, researchers found layers of ancient sea salt. Moreover, about 13 to 11,000 years ago, Earth experienced the so-called cataclysmic period. Tornadoes, earthquakes, and tsunamis raged across the whole planet and presumably flooded the Sahara Desert. At the same time, it's unclear why vast areas of dry land in the Pacific Ocean also got submerged but never rose back to the surface again. Especially since, not far from this place, there's Easter Island with its famous giant heads. Archaeologists have long been confused by a very obvious illogicality. Who built and why would they build such massive monuments on a tiny island like that? But if we imagine it used to be a mountaintop on the territory of vanished Zealandia, we get a typical religious destination and place of pilgrimage constructed by a mysterious ancient society. Its members could have been the mighty opponents of the Indus civilization who destroyed it with nuclear bombs. As for now, all these strange inconsistencies found on maps and in historical chronicles keep waiting for someone to shed light on them. But sometimes seekers of historical fallacies get too carried away. For instance, Russian scientist Anatoly Fomenko puts a question mark over 1,500 centuries of human history. According to him, Volodymyr the Great, the Grand Prince of Kiev, was actually one of the Roman emperors. If so, this means Jesus Christ lived in the 15th century. Therefore, the truth was hidden from us all by falsifying literally all historical documents. Compared to this, the scandals involving the Vatican seem like childish antics. Perhaps the most crucial thing in exposing historical inaccuracies is knowing when to quit and avoiding bringing even more chaos. Do you agree? Share your opinion.